You are listening to the Fascia Guide, a podcast about the living body, about new research and a new perspective on health, pain and what it means to be alive. The Fascia Guide is a conversation between Hans Bolin, innovator and fascia expert, Per Johansson, doctor of human ecology and historians of science and ideas, and me, Axel Bolin. So, I have a topic to discuss today. I've been looking at fascia research for the last 13 years or 10 years, and there's so much research. We even built a database around all this research, and it's amazing research. It's about how the body works, of course, but also about how it flows and how it heals. And it's made by really, really good researchers. It's professors of anatomy, it's doctors, it's liver pathologists, it's really renowned researchers doing real proper research, and the implications of this research is truly fantastic. We've been working with different methods to use this to help the body heal in different ways, and it really works. So the possibilities is amazing. So we have all this new research, all these new ways of making this research become real, and all these possibilities, but still there is so little about this in media or in the public, or it's not mainstream at all. It's not that big. Not many people know what fascia is. So why is it like that? Why is fascia so hard to understand, or why is it so hard for fascia to become mainstream?
Well, I think the short answer to that is something we have touched upon in earlier episodes. It is that it seems very clear by now that what all this new fascia research points to is the necessity of starting to learn to think in terms of flows and wholeness and how things fit together. Also, so it requires a perspective, a sort of top-down perspective is required. You have to see the body as a whole. You have to see how the living body interacts with the environment, and you have to learn to think about how the different parts of the body interconnect, not as parts but as participants, you could say, in the flow of the wholeness, and that very way of thinking goes very much against the whole grain of how Western civilization is put together. It works. All of us who have grown up in Western civilization have, without realizing it, learned to think in a way that requires us to see things as parts. And if you look at science and medical science, most of it is also actually much of fascia research is conducted on the basis of a high degree of specialization. So you have very detailed knowledge about certain details of how fascia works, or any other part of the body for that matter. So the specialization and the detailed knowledge of parts, we're very good at that. It doesn't matter if it's medicine or some other part of what we're doing in society. Everything is partitioned in certain ways. We will have to return to this from several aspects in this conversation, but so far I think you have to just realize that if you have learned to think in terms of parts, and if you have learned to value specialized knowledge above all other kinds of knowledge, you are not equipped to think in terms of wholeness and the whole living body as such. It requires a quite different kind of thinking, and that's the challenge. You can't unlearn certain things and learn other things overnight.
I remember one lecture that I saw when I was 15 or 16 that really had an impact on my whole life, actually. It was called Changing the Education Paradigm, and it was Sir Ken Robinson who held that lecture. And what was interesting with this video I saw, it was made by RSA Animate, I think they were called, and they had they drew the whole lecture, so they made illustrations along with the actual lecture. And it was based on another idea he had, that schools might be killing creativity. So they have done studies on children who are really small, and they saw that they were really creative, but when the more educated they were, the less creative they were. And he was talking about how the school was actually made for the based on the industrial society, where you have. He was questioning why you divide classes by age, like the class of like almost by manufacturing year, the class of 90, the class of 91, the class of 92, and also that you divided the subjects by different like departments in a factory, and you have the ringing bell, and you have he made a metaphor with the school as a factory and students as products. And when you take that metaphor and really look into it, it was really interesting to see how deeply integrated that is into the way we look at knowledge and learning. And I really remember that in school, when it was quite weird actually to have different teachers and different subjects, but they were all connected in one way. I mean, social studies and history is actually connected because history is part of the social studies, so it's weird breaking it up in that sense.
But isn't it the same as we had when we were in Finland, when we launched in Finland, and we had a proposal from the Swedish speaking education center for physiotherapists, and we said, and they were interested in doing a fascia course for the physiotherapist. And what did they say?
So we had a whole education how to learn fascia and fascia treatment, and they're really interested. And we said, well, you need to put this in your core courses, like it should be part of the main education. And they said,
no,
we can't do that because we have this amount of hours and this amount of topics and this amount of things that we need to do, and we can't change that. It will take us 5 years to change it, and it would be too much work, and then we need to remove something else. We can't. And we started to explain that, well, it's why should you learn about muscles and skeleton and organs and all these different body parts and then learn about fascia and how it's connected, when fascia is actually the whole body. And they had found it hard to take that in, because they had to change their whole education.
Yeah, they wanted to have it as a add-on for when you have all the education done, then you can go on fascia specialists. So it was like, why is it so hard to change? So maybe one thing that you said that different to get fascia in mainstream media or in media is that you have to change the education system.
It doesn't fit.
It doesn't fit in the education system. So why is what's the problem with the education system as we have today? Because that was one thing we saw in Finland.
What we have gotten into now is the realization that it's very easy to say that what is needed is another way of thinking, and for some people this seems to apply that well, if you just change the way of thinking, all will be as it should. Apart from the problem that it's always difficult to change the way you think, but the additional problem here, which I think is the crucial one, is what you have touched upon already in relation to the education system. Axel, you said that a school in modern society is organized sort of like a factory with very with separate subjects, separate processes, and the students pass through the school systems in a certain order, in a certain way, with certain according to certain criteria. So it's a very close analog to a factory, actually, and you could say the same, which is very relevant to our topic. You could say the same, perhaps even more so, if you look at a modern hospital, which is a factory for processing illnesses. You could say you have persons, living whole persons coming to the hospital with some kind of ailment or illness, or and then they get diagnosed. Well, this seems to be a heart condition, but you have a broken leg, and so on and so forth. So then you enter the system according to what diagnosis you have received, and then that diagnosis is processed through the system in certain very well organized ways, and for certain ailments and illnesses, this works very, very, very well. For other kinds of trouble, it doesn't work so well, because it's perhaps you will have to take into account not only the body as a whole and the person as a living being, but you have to take into account all kinds of environmental influences as well, if you're going to have a proper view of what really ails this person. That any condition which requires a more broad approach is very difficult to treat within the modern hospital care system, because it's organized just like schools are, in a very specialized and divided fashion. So this, I think, is the main one of the main reasons why it's so difficult to introduce another way of thinking. It's not just that it's another way of thinking. It is, you are immediately confronted by the very, very practical problem of where will you put it, given that you have divided things in this way. You have departments for this and you have clinics for that. Where does fascia, as a kind of wholeness organ in the whole body, interconnecting all the other organs, where does it fit? Which clinic shall we?
Yeah,
you can't answer that question. So the theoretical problem and the problem of how to think in another way immediately transforms into a very extremely practical problem, which is very difficult to, it's impossible really to solve the practical problem within the existing structures, and so that's one reason why it's and it goes, whether you look at hospitals or other kinds of clinics or at the educational system, you run up, as you said, against the same kind of problem.
So is it more of a model way of thinking that's wrong? Because when I was in IT industry before, one thing that changed the whole industry was that when I'm sold, so we have mainstream the computers done, and to build mainstream computer programs was quite hard. And then the PC industry came, and you could actually show programs. And I said to one guy, he was selling a thing for a bank system, and I said, how do you show it? You don't show it. You explain what it does, and then you sell it. So and the thing was in when you had the IT industry, and then you have the mainstream way of looking at computers, then they had the PC industry, and then the internet, the web industry came, and it was a whole different way of thinking. Of if you do the internet, you have to see the interface with the customer. The customer interface is more direct. And maybe it's the way of thinking is that we have like computer systems that are so integrated in a way of thinking that we can't change the computer system, or we can't change the way of thinking. When I look at, for instance, if when we had the show jumper day we start with, he had problems with his grain, and I said that we don't going to treat the grain. Why? Because everybody has tried to treat it, and it's been wrong for you have been ill for 2 months.
The groin.
So we don't treat the groin. We see if the whole body is something wrong with. And when we change the posture and balance of the whole body, in 1 week he could ride again. So I think it's maybe we're stuck in a way of thinking that we can't really change paradigm, change focus, or change, like, focus out. So you see what can be. We're so focused on special things that we can't focus out to see the whole body as or yeah.
But I think it's something deeper than that, because if you look at something that's new, then you need to and if it goes along the set course, then it can be implemented. But if it's something different, then it can't be implemented. Because if you go back to the Finnish school example, so they were really impressed with the fascia course that we had. They really wanted to implement it. They were really interested in fascia. They've learned about fascia. Fascia was quite big in Finland way back, like way back in 2010, 2015. It was early in Finland. So they were interested in fascia, but they couldn't find a way to implement it in their base course, their basic course. So that speaks of one. They don't have the flexibility, and not they in particular, but they as an educational institution. And another example of that really struck me was I heard, I think it was you who told me that, Per, that they found they showed an image of a piece of stone to a group of archaeologists or stone experts, and then they said that, how old is this, or what environment was this from? And they said, oh, this is probably a rainforest type of environment, or a lot of that kind of environment. And then they zoomed out the picture, and it was a sphinx. And then everyone said, no, it's not. I take back everything I said, because it's no, it can't be the sphinx, because the sphinx is in the desert. And then some archaeologists have found evidences that could mean that old Egypt was older than Egypt actually was. That Egypt is thousands of years older than we think it is. But that idea is not even worth investigating fully, because that would mean that we need to rewrite all history books. We need to write the whole story about how the civilization grew. We need to re-educate all the historians. We need to. So it's hard to think in that way, because it demands the price is so high, the cost is so high to change that story that we have. And imagine then looking at fascia as a story, and then you need to retrain all medical professions. You need to rewrite all medical educations, and that's so hard. It's so costly to do that. But the question is, why are we so unflexible? Why can't we make that change? Why have we built up a system that is so locked in a certain way? And it's the same thing with institutions. They can be malfunctioning, they can be ineffective, they can be costly, they can be terribly wrong, and then you either just pump more money into it and hope that will solve the issue, but you never change the system.
I'm almost tempted to say that it's human nature not to want to change, which in one way explains a lot, but not in a very useful manner. So one aspect of the problem here is that a certain way of thinking, a certain way of specialization, a certain way of dividing things into parts is institutionalized in education, in hospitals, and all kinds of established actual systems of and ways of doing things in our society. So that's one reason, and a very obvious and then very important reason for why it's difficult to even if you as an individual can learn to think if you're so inclined in another way. You can't implement it in your work if you're a doctor or a nurse or something, or a physiotherapist. Even if you're in private are able to change perspective and think in another way, you can't take it with you into your work, because the work is organized in a way that doesn't facilitate that other kind of thinking. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that there are vested interests in how things work. There are ways of making money. There are ways of coming to important decisions politically, and all kinds of things intertwined with each other. So one intellectual aspect of this, or scientific aspect of this, is that the majority of medical research is based on, to put it in very simple general terms, is based on biochemistry and molecular biology. So this means that in addition to emphasizing the specialization, it also means that if you do medical research on biochemical and molecular biological premises, the only results as to treatment you can get from that kind of research also is based in the same kind of understanding of things in molecular biology. So if you're interested in pain, the only way of treating pain from that perspective is to come up with various drugs that alleviate the pain. So if you, as is the case with fascia treatment of fascia, which doesn't require drugs but comes to grips, can treat and even heal pain, even chronic pain, in other ways, this can not, the reason this works cannot be understood in terms of molecular biology. This does not mean that there isn't a biochemical aspect to it. You have all these things with hyaluronic acid and collagen and everything. So of course, what you do when you treat fascia in the way you do, it has consequences and for how, if you look in detail of how molecules interact and what happens at that level, but the explanation, you can't explain why physical fascia treatment works the way it does in terms of what happens at the molecular level. You can specify what happens at the molecular level to a certain extent, but you can't explain why the treatment works at that level. So this means that because what you do in the kind of fascia treatment which you do, you treat the whole body. You treat the flow of the body. You don't treat. Well, it's a very practical application of another perspective, you could say. And the whole health apparatus, hospitals and everything, and clinics, and how everything works, which we touched upon, can't really. What do you mean? Should we start treating pain with drugs and start treating pains in other ways? There are vested interests which aren't very happy about that, because if you can make people well and free from pain without drugs. This means that you can't make money on drugs in that area.
But is this a typical Western modern world problem? Or because you are an historian of science and ideas. You have studied different cultures, different both current cultures, but also historical cultures or historical ideas or different societies and civilizations. Did everyone else do like we do, or are we special in a sense in our way of looking at things and our way of building up society and our way of, because there are some things that are interesting with our culture. We are more people now than we've ever been. That's one thing. And we have affected our world more than other civilizations that we know of. Like, we have built so many things. We have built houses and roads and infrastructure, and we've really changed our environment. And we kind of think of ourselves as the most advanced or most developed or most the best civilization. Is that true, that image we have of ourselves?
Well, the short answer is that we are unique. Our civilization is unique and can't really be compared to any other civilization. And of course, there's a history behind this. To put it very simply, there are two preconditions for our way of thinking and thus organizing things. And one precondition is the division between the inner world and the outer world, between subject and object, and virtually all medical research and other scientific research is based on the division between the objective and the subjective, and everything is focused on the objective. So you make a very extremely, really philosophical, extremely basic assumption. It is that we live in an objective world which exists completely independently of our experience of it, and our experience is completely subjective. So if you want to, and our concept of truth is based on this. So we don't really accept anything as true if it isn't based on research or thinking focused on the so-called objective world, irrespective of experience. So even if we strive to understand ourselves, we sort of go about it in a really quite strange roundabout way. We understand our inner lives in terms of studies, objective studies of our bodies, our nervous system or something, how the brain works. That's why you behave the way you do. So any kind of introspection, any kind of direct experiential knowledge doesn't really count if you want to say something about how things really work and what is true. This is one thing that makes understanding fascia difficult, this division between inner and outer, this separation, this dichotomy, because current research on fascia has shown on an objective scientific basis, somewhat ironically you could say, that the functioning of fascia in a living body doesn't really care whether anything is categorized as inner or outer, as objective or subjective. The fascia reacts and does what it does, irrespective of that. So this is an additional dimension to why it's so difficult to grasp the importance of the direction fascia research points in.
I'm thinking of, do we think a lot about how we are thinking and why we are thinking the way we're thinking?
I don't think we think about that at all. Never.
Because
we only
really...
think about that if it gets really fucked up things, and maybe things are starting to get really fucked up by now. So more and more people are thinking about how we think and why do we necessarily have to think the way we do. So that's characteristic of when things are starting to get out of hand for one reason or another. But one way of appreciating the uniqueness of our approach is to compare the understanding, our modern divided understanding of the body with another very old and very well established tradition, like, for example, traditional Chinese medicine, which is based on experience rather than observations of what you think of as an objective world. So, this has led to in TCM you categorize the living body in terms of organs as well, like heart and lungs, kidney, and so on. But when in TCM you speak of kidney, for example, you're not only thinking of the physical kidneys, in a Western anatomical sense. You also think of all the things that are affected by the way the role of the kidney in the body isn't just one thing; it affects the whole body in various ways. So the kidney it affects your inner life, how you view things, how you experience things, how things feel, has also to do with the kidney and the heart and the lungs in various ways, but in different ways. So they don't separate the inner experience from the outer possible outer observations of various conditions. It's wholly integrated, and everything is categorized in a way which seems extremely strange to us. So if anyone decides to really learn to understand and practice traditional Chinese medicine and comes from the West and is educated in our Western system, the first thing that person has to do is to unlearn virtually everything one think one knows about the body and start to see it in another way. So it's absolutely possible to categorize things and think about the living body in ways which are extremely advanced and works as to treatment as well than we do in the modern West. That is not to say that one thing is necessarily better than the other. I think it's most useful to think about it as if you look upon the body from a modern Western perspective, you can understand and see certain things, and you can develop certain treatments, and that is all very well. But it is equally clear that there are things you cannot see from that perspective, which are invisible to it. And in the same way, there are in traditional Chinese medicine terms, you can see things which cannot be seen from a Western perspective, but also certain things are invisible from that perspective. So the wise way would be to learn to distinguish when is one perspective the best one.
But that requires flexibility.
Yeah, and it requires an ability to shift perspective, learn different perspectives and shift perspective. And since we are educated within very severely, you could say, educated within one perspective, it's very difficult for us to shift I think it is easier actually for someone trained in TCM to shift perspective and think in Western terms than vice versa.
I think people underestimate how powerful ideas are. There is a sketch by a Canadian YouTuber called Ryan George, a really funny guy. He has this show where it's called the 90s. So he portrays a guy in the 90s, and they're sending someone to the future to explain current events. So you're watching current events from the 90s perspective, and then the future person is trying to explain what's going on, and the 90s person is like looking at things from the 90s perspective. So he doesn't understand all these things going on. It's the things are really weird. And things like an iPhone is extremely weird, or that you have access to the internet, or because things that didn't exist in the early 90s, and that's not long ago. It's what 30 years ago, and things have changed so much. And
but my brother talked about he bought an iPhone when it came and said it has no buttons. What?
A phone with no buttons?
But the phone has buttons. No, it has no. It's another thing. It was. It was really.
And now there is a whole generation that's actually in their 20s now that never knew a world without internet. They don't know a world without smartphones. They don't know a world without. So it's so fascinating how quick things have been and how that has affected the whole way we're living, we're thinking, we're doing stuff, and it is also affected our way of concentrating, our way of learning things. It's questioned how we gain knowledge, and it's really changed a lot of things. But we tend to forget how the world looked before that. And I remember there was this interview with a very old person saying, what was the invention that really had the most impact on you? And I think the author of that article thought it was going to be the TV or the computer or internet or cars, and he was like, the bike. Because when the bike came, I could travel much quicker from the village, that village to this village, and that changed my whole world. And there was this other person who said, well, the light bulb, because we could read at night. And then you start to think that, things we take for granted or things we take as really natural maybe aren't that natural. Because if you really stop and think about it, if I look at my biological evolutionary being, how natural is it for me to sit in a room with air condition, or to travel in a metallic box that's a car, or to walk on paved streets, or to eat processed food, or all these things that I'm doing all the time. I mean, I can take coffee beans that are from another part of the world and drink it every day and think that it's Swedish, Swedish coffee. But it's not. There is no coffee beans growing in Sweden. So we have a completely different world, and we can't stop. We never think about how powerful the idea that came, because it all started with an idea. So someone had the bike, and the bike went to that, and then it became that, and then it became that, but we don't tend to see that process, like how much we are affected by other generations' ideas and inventions, and how they actually affect our whole way of living.
We don't really have a sense of history in that way, but I think the important point here is implicit in what you said, that the kind of environment we grow up in and become adult in, and is what is natural to us. It doesn't matter if it's artificial in some philosophical sense. It's natural to us. It's natural with us, for us to have electricity and running water from a tap, and it's not in all parts of the world, but definitely in the modern world, it's not by now natural to have a smartphone and connecting to internet everywhere. So if you grow up in that environment, that is not strange. It's the way things are, and this can be connected directly to what we said earlier about the healthcare system, which if you grow up in a world in which the healthcare system works the way it does, specialized and so on, that is natural. So if new ideas, if new ways of treating illnesses are developed, they are, from a certain perspective, unnatural. See what I mean?
Yeah, so back to the question of why fascia is so hard to understand, or why fascia is not mainstream, is because for us as a culture, looking at the body through a fascia perspective is unnatural. It's unnatural for us to see the body as a whole. It's unnatural for us to think in terms of flow, or to think about the body as something that's alive and not static. It's unnatural for us.
Yeah, I think one thing.
It's not spontaneous. It's not. It doesn't fit with how we spontaneously think and experience life in the modern world.
But the problem is to understand how can it be so hard to understand. Is it the education system? Is the way of how the basic of the medical industry is built up in way of thinking? Because when I met the guy, we're talking about how to measure inflammation within the body by sound, and he was a professor in physics, and he has been working. He was a Finnish guy, and he was really good at sensor devices that we have in phones, in new phones. And I said, could you measure inflammation by sensors? Yes, of course. Okay, you can do it, because everything that's not in equilibrium with sound. How? But how? But that's a known fact that from the 50s, I think, that everything is not in equilibrium with sound. So you can actually hear the sound of inflammation. But has anybody done that? No. And why? No, the doctors are trained on not trained on physics. They are trained on biochemistry, and so we have not done that. But it's another example is for instance, if from the history we had X-rays. That was the first thing you can see inside bodies, but that's just a skeleton. And one professor I met said it was actually a veterinarian too. If we have invented ultrasound from the beginning instead of X-rays, we had been looking at living fascia from the beginning instead of X-rays. So it's like if you have the musculoskeletal system, it's locked. It's like everything is. That's the picture we have of the body. But if you have the ultrasound, you can see, oh, it's moving. And we have ultrasound in childbirth. You can see the living baby. But it's also technical or what kind of inventions have been the one who is it's the preferred in the medical industry, because it's the same as in thermography. Thermography, you can see the living what do you call it? The living heat from the body, and it's really amazing what you can see and how much interactions we have with each other, and how it looks. But that's a thing that didn't fit into the medical industry.
I think, for example, if I touched you on the arm and then we take a picture 2 minutes after that, you will have my hand palm on your body.
Yeah,
like
and you can see the reflection I can see the reflection on myself in the window 2 meters from. So it's amazing how much energy we radiate. You
give away. Yeah,
give away. So the thing is, why is what's behind the curriculum, how we educate? Because the education system, as you said, it's made for the Industrial Revolution. And if you said the change in the education paradigm, I think it's 10 years old. He said that we're trying to educate people for a future we don't know anything about. And we use a curriculum that's 150 years old or maybe older. And is that the way? Because when I met I met a specialist in pain and a researcher in pain, and I told about we had done a study on frozen shoulder and said, but how long does the pain relief occur? And I said, it all depends on what you're doing. If you're falling down again or you're hurting yourself, you're going to be in pain. So the body is everything is moving all the time. So you can't just say that. But her question was so interesting. How long? But yes, how now is that you can treat frozen shoulder, but how long will the treatment stay? How long will they be healed? And I said, that's a crazy question, because it all depends what you're doing. It was so hard for her to understand that kind of question.
Yeah, and I think that brings us back to the problem here, because we can say that this is our way of working in the Western world and all the progress we're making and so on, and we've developed these technological things and we've blah 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 blah. But there is a problem with this lack of flexibility, because when things are changing as they are now, you need to be flexible. Like if the world is changing, which it certainly has done for the past 10 years, and how kids are brought up these days is changing, and what you learn is changing, knowledge is changing, the work environment is changing, technology develops and also demands us changing. So you can't educate someone the same way now as you did 40 years ago, because the world is completely different in terms of work. And
the serious reality here is that if you continue to do things in a way which is not sufficiently in accord with how life actually manifests and works, and how, then all systems and all ways of doing things which are not sufficiently in accord with that will eventually self-destruct anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the challenge is to before that happens, preferably to develop in parallel ways of doing things, ways of education, ways of other kinds of clinics and treatments, to develop that independently, as independently as possible, and in parallel with existing systems, to establish other ways of thinking and working. Because I from experience in various kinds of endeavor, I would say that it and from countless historical examples as well, it's not possible to reform a system which makes the wrong assumptions from the start, so to speak. So it's not possible to reform it. It has to be exchanged for something else. And how do you do that? In a new, let's say, fascia, the fascia perspective, if you call it that, requires another view of the body. It requires another way of thinking. It requires another perspective on knowledge and life and everything. It requires other kinds of treatments. It requires other kinds of organizing clinics and so on and so forth. If that's the case, which I think is true, you have to develop those ways of doing things on from scratch, so to speak, on those premises. You can't press them into the existing systems. I'm rather pessimistic about on the second possibility. But that's one of the, if you take this conversation, if you take one step back and look at this from above, or look at what's really going on here. So if you look at this modern world, the modern society, the modern way of thinking, so it's quite unflexible in one way. It's not natural for us to change perspective or change way of thinking, or look at things in terms of flowing, or look at, I mean, our whole picture and knowledge of the body is based on that the body is dead and it's divided in different parts, and you can pick the different parts aside, but you can't you can't take a living body and pick out all the parts, because then we will die, so it's not a living body anymore. So the whole basic assumptions behind this society we built, or the structures we built in this society, it's kind of anti-life. Because if you look at, so for us it's natural to be in this artificial environment for so on, but it's not natural when it comes to our bodies. It's not natural when it comes to our relationship with nature, with each other, because it's this way of dividing things, which we learn from the day we're born. We learn to divide stuff. That's not how life really works, right? Because if you look at nature, for example, if you take one seed and you plant that seed and you give it water and nutrients and so on, that seed can grow and become a big tree. So that's not like dividing stuff. That's putting something in and then it becomes something more. And that's more
from a very grand perspective, you could say what we're up against is a tendency which is really from a certain perspective, it has been part of Western civilization all along, but it is these days it's reaching a kind of climax almost. What we're up against is an increasing artificialization or technocratization of everything, really. So if the living world, if we as living persons and living bodies don't really fit into an artificial technocratic system, then we will have to be artificialized, if that's a word, more and more in order to fit in. So that's what I think is going on, and of course it goes against life. It goes against life as a spontaneous, natural process. So it's a rather serious matter, unfortunately.
Do you think that fascia is it the same? Is everything the same in Western civilization, or can fascia be more into Japanese thinking, or to Chinese thinking, or Indian thinking, or what is?
Well, I remember in the documentary we made about fascia research and the fascia perspective, there was a short comment by a Chinese professor in, I think, clinical Qigong, who said that the fascia perspective is very much in tune with that field. With Qigong and with acupuncture, because the acupuncture meridians, so-called, seem to correspond very closely with the fascia network, how it fills the body along certain paths, rather. So that's a correspondence. Fascia seems to be a kind of possible anatomical, physiological link between modern Western medicine, medical research, natural science research, and the perspective of traditional Chinese medicine. So there's a possibility to merging and meeting via fascia.
So maybe if fascia is going to be big in media, it has to go to Qigong or yoga or something like that. That's from the ground or from the other perspective that you take.
That's certainly one possibility. Yes.
Yeah.
I think also it's also a question of getting people interested, like getting more people interested in understanding their own body and how it works, or what we say, the living body or the living creature, to understand what it means to be alive and start to feel how the body feels, and start to think about these things. Like if I asked you, Per, do we think of how we're thinking? And you're saying no. And then I said, do we grasp the impact of history and the ideas of science and history? And you're basically saying no. So we tend to not stop and think about the world we're actually living in and how we are thinking about things.
Yeah, we are not we are not self-aware. We're not aware of history. We're not aware of how we think. We're not aware of how we feel, and all this is made difficult by the ordinary way of conceiving things and doing things in our societies.
But I also think it's because of the story we've been told. Like, I mean,
yeah, that's
I've been told
included.
since I grew up, I've been told this story that this is the best of worlds. This is the best of civilizations. We are the most developed, the most civilized, the most advanced and perfect civilization. And this is if I'm growing up with that idea, then I tend to look at all other ways of thinking as less valuable or less interesting or not. So we are the civilization that colonized. We are the imperialist civilization. We are the civilization that went to other cultures and said our way of doing things is better than yours, and not trying to understand different cultures or different way of thinking, but saying ours is the best. This is the only way to go. You need to adapt to our way of thinking, or die. That's kind of what we did. So we're coming from this idea of we have had this idea of hybris for a very long time. Like we think we are the best, and maybe it's time to let go of that myth and start to look at how things really are and how things really are working and why we're thinking the way we're thinking. Because the solution could probably be found in not only in history or in other cultures, but with the help of that. And I like the quote by Neil Thies that we had in the interview from the Fascia Research Congress in 2018, that it's the same body. It's just different metaphors and different stories and different way of looking at things and different way of categorizing it. But if we start to combine these things that we know, if we start to get this, we start to look at it as something together, then we don't have to look at Eastern or Western medicine or old and new way of thinking. We can start off looking at a completely new way of thinking, picking the best things from different cultures. And but then, as you said before, Per, we need to do it with the core foundation in terms of what principles we want. Like, how do we make something be more alive? How do we stimulate life? How do we stimulate healing? How do we stimulate growth? How do we make us feel more together and less separate? How do we combine instead of divide? How do we? So it's actually theoretically quite easy.
Yes, it's the spontaneous, natural way of doing things as human beings. So in that sense, we are on a. It's not really problematical. In some ways, it's not really problematical at all. The problem is how we have become accustomed to think against ourselves, you could say. We have organized things which are not conducive to. Well, by now you could say are not conducive to life as life has arisen and developed and evolved on this planet. It's not conducive to that. We have developed and acquiesced to a system which doesn't really care about the basic living systems, how they work. And we know the irony is that other aspects of natural science are very well aware of this. It's not really unknown at all. It's just not prioritized.
But that's what's.
So there's hope.
Yeah,
you could say.
And that's what I've taken away from my years with working with this, because the more I learn about fascia is humbling. It really makes me more humble about myself, and it helps me focus to strive to be more alive. and it definitely piques my curiosity. So if you're curious and if you're humble, I think it's easier to understand fascia.
No, the body is a miracle. So we are living miracles. Everybody is a miracle. That's another way of looking at it.